Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Uri Kurlianchik, and we're going to talk about his new book, Noblesse Oblige, as well as gaming matters and other things that he's done. So, Uri, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we can talk about your new book.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me. Secondly, this book is my first novel. I've previously only written role-playing game materials and some short stories, which I gathered in an anthology called Tales from Israeli Storyteller. So that was like my first attempt at fiction. My day job is playing with kids in schools and community centers as an after-school activity. So ever since I started working the job, I've written a lot less for games, unfortunately, but I do have some products in mind that will be more aimed for children. Okay, so would you like me to talk about the book now?
Yeah, yeah. Why don't we get into the, well? Actually, before we do, I just wanted to ask you: did you you said that you play a lot of role playing games in your day job?
Yes.
So is that is part of the activities that you're involved in there?
That is the activity, actually.
That is the activity. Okay, so because you gave me a very high number. I remember I was boasting that I was in like 3 games a week or something to you, and I think you said that you were in 10 games, and so that
yes. These games are short. Each session is 90 minutes long. We have sessions that take place during school time and in the evening. And the players are the youngest are second graders, and the oldest I had are seventh graders. So
Okay.
there are also different age groups. With the younger kids, I play like a simplified versions of Dungeons and Dragons, and the older ones are like all sorts of stuff. I've done Shadowrun, Vampire, Traveler, Star Wars.
And before we get to the book too, I just wanted to ask: have you found that they take well to the regular RPGs, or do you use the? I know that there's a lot of games out there that are designed with children in mind. Do you take any of that material or any techniques from those kinds of games?
No, I did not, because honestly, I'm a little critical of those games because I'm going to say something sounds really strange, but they infantilize children.
Mm-hmm.
Children. They are not as childish as some of the books assume. I mean, children do want to be badass, to be awesome, to do tough things. They don't want to just be chasing fairies and, finding magic mushrooms and stuff like that. So I do think that children should play slightly darker stuff. Like if you look at almost all fairy tales, they're quite dark, even their modern versions.
No, that's true. And I started playing D&D, I think, in 3rd grade. So I mean, it's manageable, I think, for a child.
Yes, and you go out, you kick orc ass, you get treasure, you gain levels, you defeat stronger monsters. There is no reason to do something which is like especially childish. I mean, these are not kindergarten children.
And so why don't we, I definitely want to return to that topic, but I would like
Absolutely.
to discuss the book. Again, the title is Noblesse Oblige. And
Yes.
Can you tell us about the basic premise and the tone, too? I was very interested in the tone of the book.
Absolutely. I will actually start by telling a little anecdote about how this book was born. So a friend and I were just sort of throwing ideas back and forth, and we'll just throwing random names into the air and random details. And then I looked at the conversation. It wasn't Google, so like I opened the Google chat and I pasted the conversation onto a sheet, and I started thinking, what can I do with that thing? Because it looked very interesting. And I sort of starting to basically role play with myself, like being both the GM and the player, and like challenging the heroine and coming with solutions. And sort of, I didn't know I was writing a novel. And after like several months, I realized I was actually working in a novel.
So it started out as a role-playing thing almost, and then it
sort
became...
of with myself, yes. And so this book, it's written practically in real time. There is almost no time passage. The entire book happens in just one small location, and this is the premise. There is, like in the future, the corporations basically evolve into royal houses. They have aristocratic titles. They have like extra legal powers. Some of them actually own portions of the sun, entire satellites. That future is more technologically advanced than ours, but there is no faster than light travel. So, getting to Neptune will take you many months. And one princess from a very big corporation, she feels bad about one of the wars her father is involved in, and she wants to find some place for the refugees created by the war to go to. And she comes on a secret visit to a very distant planetoid on the edge of the system, where she meets German Baron, who tells her that I kind of lied to you, I'm not going to accept any refugees, and this isn't like a party in your honor, this is an auction, and the item on sale is you. But you can participate in it as well, so maybe if you offer me something good enough, you can buy yourself. And other guests are like the worst villains in the system. You have like this Chinese space pirate. You have like an infamous Russian aristocrat who is like a brilliant duelist. You have French poisoners. You have a Japanese samurai. There's a corporate samurais. And the verse is like, there are 24 hours. You can do whatever you want. And after this time passes, I will declare the winner of the auction. And the book covers these 24 hours and how like different alliances form, break. There are all sorts of intrigues. The princess tries to find allies. She tries to maybe save herself in some way because she's basically alone. She's not going to get rescued. She can only help herself.
And the princess is the main character?
Yes.
And so it sounds kind of it's science fiction-y, right? There's a
yes, it's very light science fiction. It's mostly humorous. It's about as science fiction-y as Star Wars or a bit more like Dune, perhaps.
Okay, so, yeah, no, Dune kind of leapt to mind actually. I mean, partly from the title, but also the opening passage kind of.
Sort of, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was taking place in the same universe as Dune. Mm-hmm. This is more or less the book that you would have received.
Okay, and I also noticed that there was a review that compared it to Terry Pratchett meets Douglas Adams, and so was there a conscious attempt at humor, or is it is the tone when you say light toned, is it humorous light, or is it light just because it's space adventure?
There wasn't a conscious attempt at humor, but when I'm running a game, I always mix jokes with the game, even if it's like a serious and dark subject matter. Uh-huh. You still want to say something witty or amusing, so most of the humor doesn't come from the setting isn't humorous, but the interaction of the characters. They often say like funny things. They try to outwit one another. Some of them are just funny people. So that is the source of the humor. The setting itself isn't a joke.
Okay.
It's not realistic either, but it's not meant to. It's like this world, the setting itself is funny. Mm-hmm. Like just the world as it is, it's funny. I didn't want to go in that direction.
Okay. And who the publisher is Wordfire Press, right? And
yes.
So is this available on Amazon and at bookstores? Is it something that people can easily obtain?
Yes, all the best bookstores, as they like to say in ads.
Okay.
Actually, the publisher is Kevin Anderson, and he's the person who's writing all the new Dune books.
Yeah, I noticed that, and that was another Dune connection. And so
that's one of the reasons I submitted the book to this publisher, because I saw, okay, they published the new Dune books. I love Dune, so let's try them.
Okay, all right, and how is the reaction been so far? I know it just came out. It came out like what, on the 28th or something. So,
yeah. Well, so far it's been read like by a dozen people maybe. So I don't know about the reaction of the masses, but the people who did really like it. The book is written purposely in a very obsolete language, because it's in the future, but the culture is more similar to the 19th century.
Yes.
I use slightly obsolete language on purpose. And some people said it takes a bit of time getting used to, but I hope it's fun.
No, I noticed that reading the intro, or not the intro, but the first chapter, and it it definitely it struck me as old timey. I didn't quite know exactly what point in history you were shooting for, but that definitely makes sense. I didn't find it that difficult, but I used to read a lot of older books when I was young, so maybe that's part of it.
No, it shouldn't be difficult. Just it's different. I don't think it's a difficult language.
Yeah, no, and I mean it's got its own. It's definitely got a style to it. It definitely has a style to it. What is this? Is this like a one-off book, or are you intending to do a follow-up? Or
actually, I want to do a sequel, but it will be very different.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to address my idea for the sequel because it will be a spoiler for the first book.
Okay, I understand.
The only thing I can say is that it will be the same universe.
And what I mean, I know that there was the backstory that prompted you to want to write this book in particular. But what prompted you to want to get into to writing novels and stories? And what were some of your major sources of inspiration?
Well, I read a lot. Like I read all the time. When I'm not reading, I'm listening to audiobooks. I'm a great consumer of audiobooks. So I really love literature. So I can't like really point at a specific inspiration. I also read a lot of nonfiction. So like in the book, I use a lot of anecdotes that like they sound completely insane, but those are things that actually happened. So I would say that nonfiction is actually a bigger inspiration than a specific kind of fiction. But if you want me to point specific novels, it will be Dune, James Bond, because there's lots of gadgets and all sorts of strange devices and attempts to fool one another. Dune, which we mention like every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
In this conversation.
Now, are you a fan of the entire Dune series, or are you a fan of like the first 3 books? Like, what's the extent of your Dune fandom?
It's kind of goes by degrees. Like I love the first book. The next books in the series are like okay, and the new books I enjoy them. They're great books. They're very enjoyable, but they don't have that degree of like mythological, almost religious potency. It's great science fiction. They are very interesting. They're full of very cool ideas, but they're not as potent from a religious standpoint.
Yeah.
Like Dune, it's like the Bible, you know.
Yeah. No, the first book especially, you get that, it has that weight to it. But I would say that for me, it's the first 3. The first 3 are really the at the center of it for me. What about?
Yeah, by the time they go to chapter house Dune, there are like so many details. The book is like the history becomes a burden at this point.
Well, that happens in a lot of series. A lot of series, they kind of collapse under their own weight, like you said, they get more details and more, and it just kind of it becomes this anchor that the story is tied to. What about? I know you wrote a collection of short stories, the Israeli Storyteller.
Tales from Israeli Storyteller, yes.
Yeah. What was the story behind that book?
I like to travel a lot. Like I used to go on all sorts of hikes and trips every week. And one time, like when we were in Qumran are the hills where they found the Quran scrolls, the hidden scrolls. So it's a hills full of caves. I was with a friend there. And like we just started throwing ideas back and forth, and I said, okay, there could be like a cool fantasy story. There's caves, there's these ancient scrolls. It screams fantasy. So after that, like every time that I'd go to a new place, I would like take out notes about like some story that could take place there. And I thought it would be really cool to write a book which could serve as a travel guide, because like all the locations are described very precisely. If I mention a certain cave in a certain location, there's actually a cave there. If I mention like a ruined Crusader castle in the forest, if you go to that forest, there will be a ruined Crusader castle there. But the characters are completely fantastical. So there's like sort of takes place in Qumran, as I said, or in Meron, which is like a holy mountain for Jews. It's like the wellspring of the Kabbalah. So, like I described the place exactly as it is. There are all these ancient graves. There are like the tombstones of Jewish holy man, but then you have golem, you have genies, you have ghouls, all sorts of creatures from Jewish and Islamic culture. And the stories they are connected thematically, but they aren't. They don't form a single narrative.
Okay.
They reference one another. Sometimes they deal with the same characters, but they don't. Like each story isn't a continuation of the previous story.
And that one is still available as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I can put links to this at the bottom of the description below on the podcast. So I'll link to Noblesse Oblige, and I'll link to the Storyteller book as well.
It's got some really nice illustrations by Hugo Solis. Like, I'm a huge fan of his art, and I was really happy that he could illustrate it.
And yeah, that's it's sort of it kind of, I'm almost thinking it sounds a little bit like the way Lovecraft might have used New England, but in a different location. It's that that sort of the authentic landscape, but maybe
I find it very humorous to think of Lovecraft writing something related to Arabs and Jews because, like, oh my God, the man was so racist.
Well, there's that, but he did have the Mad Arab in the as the sort of as the character. But yeah, no, he. I mean, I'm from New England, and the brand of racism that Lovecraft had was a very New England form of it too. So it was very sort of.
Yeah, I think it was like more scared than hateful.
Yeah, it struck me as sort of like I call it old Yankee racism, and like Yankee in the sense of like somebody from New England who can trace their ancestry back to the Mayflower. Like so like if you weren't English, that was sort of the source of the racism. It was obviously Arabs and Jews would be encompassed in that, but so would like Italians or
yeah, his depiction of Italians is also very xenophobic.
Yeah, so
but the interesting thing about Lovecraft is that his wife, the one who supported him, she was Jewish, and Bloch, the editor that actually he's one of the reasons his stories survived, Robert Bloch, the author, he was also Jewish, and if I remember correctly, I think he was also homosexual. So, like, you have this extremely xenophobic person, and the two closest people to him are Jewish.
I mean,
so there's like this very interesting contradiction here.
I think there's a lot. That happens. I think people. I think a lot of times you'll see people have a worldview in that way, but then they make exceptions and on a case by case basis, and also, I mean, who knows? Like, I've never really studied Lovecraft that deeply in terms of his personal biography, so I don't know how much of it was also maybe him changing over time, and if that played a role. But reading his stories, you can definitely feel the the xenophobia in the fiction.
Yeah, and I sort of try to go in the opposite route. So you have each story has a different kind of protagonist. Some are like Israeli Jews, some are tourists from the West. One story is about a Bedouin policeman. One story is about some talking animals in Gedi. And Gedi is the place where King David hid when Saul was looking for him. It's a nice oasis in the desert. So, like the story, the takes place there, like the hero is a goat, essentially. So, like, I try to get as many different aspects of the country in the book. And
okay.
Jews, Arabs, foreigners, animals, tourists, even illegal immigrants, whatever. Like, everyone is there.
Okay. And again, I'm going to post a link in the description below so people can find it. But let's talk a little bit about your gaming material too, because you've done a lot of game writing, and so I know most recently you did the Gorian adventure. Was it Turian Gambit? And so why don't we start there, and then we'll maybe work our way back. What can you tell me a little bit about that book?
Yes, it's a book. It's an adventure. It's fairly short. It's a supplement for the Gore Adventures book published by James Desborough, known as Grimm, probably the most beleaguered person in the role-playing world right now. And the thing is that Gore has gotten very bad vibe, but it's not really justified in my opinion because it is a cool setting. It's got like people flying on birds. It's got like strange cold beetles and priest kings. It's a really cool setting. So it does have like a lot of bondage and when people accuse the setting of misogyny, I can see where they're coming from, but it's like a small part of the setting. So the adventure I wrote is about like the characters have to get some item from a nomad clan. These like very powerful, very warlike nomads. And the thing about the adventure is that it's almost impossible to steal this item because there are like all these people outside the camp, and no matter how strong the characters are, they won't be able to defeat all the nomads. But you can actually win it. But in order to win, you have to get into the culture of the nomads. So most challenges in the adventure are actually all sorts of how to deal with the culture shock of coming to an entirely different culture, how to win all sorts of strange athletic and intellectual challenges that may be presented. So there's like some action, but it's more of a cultural adventure. Is that the direction I wanted to take it in?
And so, what about the interface 0 from Gaza with Love? Is that that was Savage Worlds, right?
Yes. It's a cyberpunk setting. I also contributed like a big chunk of the core rulebook. I wrote sections on the Middle East and on Russia, on account of being a Middle Easterner who comes from Russia. So it's a cyberpunk setting. Like, is there anything specific you'd like me to say about?
Well, I'm curious. Like, I mean, I play in a Savage Worlds campaign, and and I'm just curious if you know what was it like designing for the system? Did you find it a challenge? Did you find it easy? Was there anything different about working with that system than with others?
I wouldn't say that it was like challenging in any particular way, but it was different because in Savage Worlds the power levels are more balanced. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, if you have a 15th level character, then first level adventure it's nothing for them. It's not interesting. In Savage Worlds, even if you have a relatively powerful character, a lighter adventure it's first easier to adapt, and secondly, I think it can still be interesting because in Savage Wars usually don't get so powerful that like a dude with a gun is just something to scoff at.
Yeah. And,
so I'd say that's like the main difference.
Okay, and what's the plot of From Gaza with Love? What's the adventure set up there?
Well, in this adventure in the future, there's like no longer conflict between Gaza and Israel. Gaza is sort of like a free city, pirate heaven, if you will. Uh-huh. And there is this Russian woman. She was married to a Russian oligarch. And then they had like this nasty divorce, and she moved to Gaza. She married a local man, and then her child was kidnapped. And she doesn't know who kidnapped him and why, but it seems that like the child was taken to Tel Aviv. So the adventure is like she suspects her husband. And again, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, so like maybe it is him, maybe it's not him, but it's more an investigation, and like everyone could be involved. You could maybe they're like Kurdish spies, maybe it's the Iranians, maybe it's the Israeli intelligence, maybe it's some Bedouin. And also, she doesn't understand why her child would be kidnapped because she had a nasty divorce with her husband, but she finds it hard to believe that he would do anything so radical. But maybe her husband has like some interesting facts in his past that she's not aware of. So that's mostly like the players mostly have to investigate where is the child, and then they have to rescue the child, possibly by force. That's like the action part of the story.
Now, do you take any particular approach to investigative adventures? I know there's like a lot of discussion online about mysteries and adventures and how to do them, how not to do them. Do you have a style or an approach?
Yes, actually, I developed it when working on my very first adventure, Murder in Oak Ridge, and I have stuck to it since. So first of all, I always have a timeline. Like the story, unless the players stop it, the story advances. Like every adventure starts with a timeline, because the war doesn't wait for the characters. If there's a serial killer, they will go on killing. If someone wants to, I don't know, sell a stolen item, at some point they will meet with the client and sell it. And I always have like a certain ratio of clues and red herrings. Like always, there will be a false suspect. And also, I believe in what you may call the elegant solution. Like every investigation adventure ever designed can theoretically be solved without making a single attack roll. Also.
So you said it can be resolved without making a single attack roll.
Yes, it may be extremely difficult, almost impossible, but in theory, you can understand what's going on without having to fight anyone.
I think that's a really good. Well, number one, I like the timeline because I use those too, and in fact, I suspect I might have got that idea from you because I remember the title "Murder in Oak Ridge," and I used to devour those Dungeon Magazine adventures. And I'm like 99% sure I ran that one, and I know I picked up the timeline idea from somewhere. But I love the idea of the timeline. But I really like, this notion that they don't necessarily, if they can really think their way through the adventure, they can get through it without actually getting into a single combat.
Yes.
I think that's like a really good way to reward players that engage the mystery material.
Usually I don't do it with children because children don't have the patience to like write down a lot of stuff and connect things. But when I run a game for grown-ups, I think that like smart players should be rewarded. And also want to add the thing that in fighting, the unpredictable element is very fun. Like I hit, I miss, like a roll can be very exciting. But when you're just looking for clues, I think sometimes it's just frustrating. Like you want the players to find, I don't know, a bloody fingerprint, but everyone rolls 2 on their perception check. And it can just be so frustrating for you as a GM because the story gets stuck and it's no one's fault. So like I usually have like certain levels of clues that players receive based on their skills. I don't like to have players roll too much.
Okay. So sort of like Gumshoe kind of takes that approach where where you find the clue, you walk in the room, the knife is sort of staring you in the face on the ground. You don't necessarily have to roll to see it. And if you're a police officer with competent training, you follow the right procedure and you're going to find the clues. It's that kind of a.
The thing about the dragons is there's like always, even if you're like genius, there's always a 1 in 20 chance that you will fail.
Yeah.
And real life isn't like that. Like a professional policeman will find the fingerprint. Everything is theoretically possible. It's a story, though. It should be fun. A game shouldn't be frustrating. In the end of the day, people play games to enjoy them, not to punch the table.
No, and if you're an investigator, it makes sense that you would have that ability to methodically comb through the room.
And another thing that I like to do is if there's like a series of crimes, like every crime will be more and more sloppy. So that like smart players solve the crime very quickly, can catch the murder like after the first crime. But as the game progresses, it should get easier again because while it's not always logical, a game shouldn't be frustrating. A game shouldn't punish the players for failing to notice something. So again, Return to Murder in Oak Ridge, which I wrote in 2005. Oh my God, it's like a lot of time ago. like I would have probably done some things differently if I made it now. But if you notice that like every crime is slightly sloppier. Like the killer is more and more under pressure. So the idea is that if the player couldn't solve it at first, they have a slightly higher chance to solve it after the second crime, and so forth. So the story advances, and the players don't get bored. Because that's the most terrible thing. If your players are bored, it's even worse when they're angry, worse when they're frustrated. Like a boring game is the most terrible thing in the universe.
And the timeline can take care of that too. If the timeline is sufficiently, leading somewhere catastrophic, then the game will stay fun even if they don't end up solving the mystery. If something bad happens, by 12:30 the next morning or something. But
it also creates a sense of urgency. Like you have to hurry. You can't take all the time in the world.
Yeah. Which I think is important because that creates a feeling that their decisions matter, and if they and it can also add to the rolling, because if they need to get somewhere but to stop something bad from happening, whether they succeed or fail on a roll can sometimes determine that. So it definitely adds just a whole other level of excitement to the game. So what about the so I guess how would you describe your gaming style? Because I know now people, like with all the discussions online, people are very conscious of sort of, I'm this kind of a gamer. But I'm actually having a lot of difficulty fitting you into a box here. And I'm curious how you would describe your GMing style and your playing style.
Well, I try to run a diverse set of games, otherwise I get bored myself. Like, I can set that I'm OSR or New Wave or something. Like, I can see the advantages in every philosophy, but, like, I can run sometimes an old school game, like with a dungeon crawl. And last year in one school, I ran Against the Giants. It's been a lot of fun. It's a great adventure, very entertaining. But there is like a specific genre that I favor. I would say that usually I prefer villains that are people, not monsters, because I think that for an encounter to have meaning, it must have some dramatic consequences, not just military consequences.
Okay.
Like if you're taking a walking through the forest, suddenly an ant jumps on the ground and tries to eat you, and you kill it, and then you go forward. It doesn't actually have any story value, so it's not interesting. Like for me as a GM, just whatever. Like you kill the big bug. No one cares. So I don't have a lot of fighting usually, because like when action happens, it has to have meaning. Like the person you're fighting, you have to like feel something. You have to hate him, feel sorry for them. Maybe like be afraid for your life. I think that my best games had like one combat encounter every 3 or 4 sessions.
Okay, one encounter every 3 or 4 sessions?
One combat encounter.
One combat. Okay.
Yes, of course. For children, I don't do that because children they want a lot of action, and also like when you play with children, you have to remember the things that like you have done a million times that are already old and boring for you, that you've been doing for 20 years. For them, they are new. For you, some goblins stole our cow. Let's go kick the goblin's ass and bring the cow back. Like, that's boring. There's no twist. There's no drama. But for the children, it's awesome. It's the first time in their life they go somewhere and they fight some goblins and bring back the cow to the village.
Okay.
So I have to like always remind myself that when I'm playing with children, I want it to be very basic. I want to first like show them the basics, the most generic adventures, so when they do see something new, they can appreciate it. And that's a mistake some of my colleagues make, I think, that they instantly start taking the kids on like very complicated adventures before they got a sense of what it is to just win a fight with a goblin. No traps, no twists, just you go into a lair, there are 4 goblins there, and you fight them. And for kids, they're really excited about it. And I understand why, it's awesome. But after you've done it for a million times, it's okay, we fight goblins again, wow, whatever.
Well, and I find... Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I finished.
I was just saying, I find that can even apply to like a genre. Like when you first introduce even adults to a genre, you kind of give them the simplest introduction. You know, sort of like this is what the genre is all about, and then eventually that's going to get boring. You know, like you could, if every Wild West adventure that you run is some bandit coming into town and taking over and having to protect the town from this guy. It might get dull, but that's probably going to be one of the first types of adventures you'll throw at somebody who's never played a Western.
Yes, absolutely. But it's the same thing with movies, I think. There are like some films that are generic, and like you watch the movie and say, why would someone make such a generic film? Then you realize that this film can serve as an archetype, as an introduction.
Yeah,
but
no,
not
definitely.
Everything has to be revolutionary. You need to have some foundation.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like if you're, just use D&D as an example. Like if you're running Dungeons and Dragons, and some of the really common things that people might shy away from after playing for a while. Like you might not have as many dragon encounters, and you might not have as many dungeon crawls if you start getting into other things. But it's good to always have examples of how to do those well. Sort of essential features of the setting. And genre can be kind of like that too with movies. Like you need exemplars of the genre. But what like how did you get into gaming? Like number one, what's the scene like over there? And is there even where you picked it up? Like were you raised in Israel, or were you born outside of Israel?
I was born outside of Israel. I was born in Moscow.
Okay.
But I came to Israel very young. I was 5. So I was mostly raised in Israel, but I come from a Russian-speaking home. So it's like a lot of cultural fusion.
Uh-huh.
Growing up, I had several Russian-speaking friends. So like I do have this link to Russian culture. Well, more like Soviet culture.
Okay.
Than Russian. But my first interest in Dungeons & Dragons came when I was in the 1st grade. I picked up a magazine. It was called like Wizard magazine. It was an Israeli gaming magazine. And there was a picture of a dark elf there. And I said like, okay, oh my god, that's the coolest thing ever. I have to know more about it. And I went to the library and I saw a book that had a picture of a dark elf on it. That was like some time later. I think it was already in the 2nd grade. Maybe even later. I'm not sure, but like early on. And absolutely by accident, I picked up Homeland by Robert Salvatore.
Oh, okay. That's the Dark Elf book.
Yeah,
right?
the Dark Elf trilogy.
Yep.
And like I started reading, and that was like the best thing ever. I didn't understand half the things, but it was like the best book ever. And then I met like an immigrant from the United States, a kid, and he told me about Dungeons & Dragons, and we started trying to play. We didn't have the rules. We didn't know there were rules. We didn't have any dice, but we just sort of tell stories to one another. So there's no point in my life in which I wasn't interested in role-playing games starting from the 1st grade. And the first time I actually got my hand on the rules and ran a proper game, I think I was 12, maybe 13. It was before my bar mitzvah, so probably 12. We got like the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the rules cyclopedia, and we ran a Terrible Trouble in Trogilor, which was like the adventure that came with the book, I think. And it actually had the Dark Elf villain, and I was so happy because like I loved Dark Elves. And since that moment, we actually started running proper Dungeons and Dragons games. We had like a revolving table. Every adventure, someone else would become the GM.
And was it a big scene over there? Were you guys just a small group of people and there weren't that many others playing? What was the...
Oh, it's a big scene. There's like a convention called Icon every Sukkot. I would imagine that like every day 5,000-6,000 people come to that convention. There are lots of role players, lots of fantasy fans, lots of otaku. Like when you walk into a bookstore, fantasy and science fiction, both in Hebrew and in English, will take a big part of the wall. And a friend of mine actually worked on trying to get Arab kids interested in a role-playing game because, like the Muslims, they have a more conservative culture, so they're less interested, like in fantasy and stuff like that. They're a little suspicious of that. So she was volunteering in Aker, and she actually started running Dungeons & Dragons games for Muslim children there. So we want to get them interested as well. Everyone wants to play Dungeons & Dragons. Everyone in the whole world. There are no excuses not to play Dungeons & Dragons. So yeah, I think it's very vibrant in Israel.
Okay, and you found that it's resonated with them as the.
You mean in Aker?
Yeah, yeah.
It was a partial success. Well, she ran the game, not I, because it's pretty far away. So like I came, I gave her some tips. We printed tokens for the NPCs and the characters. And there was some language barriers because she doesn't really speak Arabic and they didn't speak Hebrew very well.
Okay.
So she had to communicate with them through an interpreter who was their teacher. So from what she told me, the game was sort of a little awkward because every time like she would say something, the interpreter would translate it using made-up words that didn't necessarily reflect what she wanted to say. And then the child would describe what they do. The interpreter would again interpret it, so it was sort of a broken phone.
Oh yeah, I can see that developing. Yeah.
We'll get there in time.
And I think it's interesting. You know I also sort of came to D&D with like the Icewind Dale trilogy. So you know that was a and I don't think people like now, that Drizzt as a character has been around forever, and so. Yeah, but at the time, it was like I remember it being the coolest thing. Like a dark elf with two scimitars was this.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
I still remember the scene where he fights the basilisk, and like it's the first chapter, and I think I read it like 5 times in a row. Just the description, and he casts darkness at the basilisk and attacks him with his two scimitars, and it's just amazing. And then when you read it, you want to do these things.
Well, and the Dark Elf trilogy is interesting too because it's like one of the first D&D books I remember where. You have like it's almost like a thought experiment. Like, what would an evil, dark elf society be like? And it's and some of the answers are very interesting. And it's all it's all about that.
Yeah, it's great fantasy. Actually, I realized now that the first book I read wasn't Homeland; it was Exile.
It was Exile. Yeah, I don't remember the actual.
Homeland.
Was that the first book in the trilogy, or did you start in one of the later books?
I started with the second book, and then I read the first book.
Okay.
Because I remember the basilisk fight, and that's in the second book.
Okay, yeah, I've read the trilogy, but I don't remember the order that the books went in. But I mean, it's actually a very entertaining trilogy. Like, and what is it? Don't the first 2 books take place underground, and then like the last book is when he gets to the surface?
The first one takes place in Menzo Barzan, the second takes place in the Underdark, and the last one he actually goes up. And eventually he meets Cetibree and Brunner and all the merry fellows.
And then that's when the Icewind Dale trilogy, I think, comes in. But yeah, and also the guy who wrote that, R.A. Salvador, he's from Boston, and so I always I don't know, I feel a degree of loyalty to him based on that too. But yeah, so so aside from D&D, I know you did mention some other systems, but what are some of the types of games that you tend to gravitate towards?
I like Vampire. The thing about Vampire is this setting is quite dark, and the darkness is built in, so it's difficult to make like a brighter version of it. So it's not something you can run as little kids, because the very basis of this world is that you need to prey on people. So while I do like dark games for kids, that's a little bit too dark. But I do run it for teenagers, and but I use like a simplified system, a very simplified system. But I've been running it for 4 years for some teenagers. So that's been going great. And we used to have like a very big vampire game for grown-ups in Tel Aviv. It was part of the One World by Night. We had some 30 players, and I was one of the storytellers. So it was like really awesome. Star Wars, the Fantasy Flight version, I think it's one of the most fun systems ever made. It's not very well balanced, but what I love about it is that in most systems you either succeed or fail. There may be like degrees of success, but that's it. In the Fantasy Flight games version of Star Wars, they're like Edge of the Empire, the first book is called. Every time you roll dice, there are also some sort of unintended consequences, which like it really challenges you as a storyteller to come up with what exactly are these consequences are. So like in addition to success and failure, you can also have advantages and disadvantages.
Mm-hmm.
You can also have like victory and despair. So you can have a roll which it's successful, but it gives you disadvantage, and it has despair. So it's what you want to do actually succeeds, but something really bad happens as well. And that's very fun. It's really stimulates the imagination, both of you and the players. I think it's a wonderful system.
And do you think that that the reason the system is good is because like the lack of balance allows that to happen, or do you think just despite the lack of balance, it's a good system?
Well, I think the lack of balance is it's not intentional, but it's so difficult to calculate odds. Because it's not numerical. Like you have different kinds of dice. And the first book is like every time something is first, it's less perfected. So there are some classes there that are just objectively better.
Okay. And does that sort of thing generally bother you, or are you fine with that?
Well, luckily, one of my regular players is an insane rules lawyer, and he can't stand to have an unfair advantage himself as well.
Okay.
So every time before I run a game, I give him a book and I say, "Okay, comrade, here's the book. Boom, read it. If something is not balanced, let me know."
That's
and
the
after
way
a week, I would get a report.
Okay. I mean, that's the way
he's a genius fixing unbalanced things. Sorry, yes.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that's the way to handle a rules lawyer. Like a rules lawyer is an asset if used well. Mm-hmm. You can have a rules lawyer occupy all of your handle all of the left brain duties that that you need. But
when I play with kids, I always tell the kids, I'm a human being. I make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. And if I make a mistake, you have to correct me. Don't be afraid. Mm-hmm. Like you shouldn't feel ashamed if you think I'm wrong. I won't necessarily agree with you, but I will hear you out. So I sort of encourage even kids to say, okay, this isn't fair. This is not balanced, or you made a calculus mistake here. I think it's very important.
Well, and I find people are more responsive when if you did make a mistake and they point it out and you just say, okay, fine. That's, it's better than if you dig your heels in and, try to explain why it wasn't a mistake. And that I think getting the trust of the players is an important thing in a game. And if they trust that you're willing to admit you made a mistake, that can go a long way. Mm-hmm. Now, what about rats? That was another thing we wanted to talk about. I know that was something you had worked on many years ago. And
yes.
You were saying it's essentially done, right? Like it's pretty much completed at this point, or?
Yes, unless like some new disaster happens, and we had a lot of those. It should be out next month. At least like the bears should receive it. I don't know when it will be available commercially. The thing about rats is one of the things I want to do with this game is make a game where you don't have a hit point system in any way whatsoever. In rats, every time your character is damaged, it gets a mutilation. And many of those are not really that horrible. So the basic concept of the game is that which doesn't kill makes you stranger.
Okay. Now, can you die in the game, or is it pure you just get mutilated and keep getting more and more mutilated?
Yes, absolutely. You can die. You can even die pretty easily, but not due to losing hit points. Like, first of all, some mutilations just kill you outright. Mm-hmm. Like if you're playing a rat and a human steps on you, you're gonna die.
Okay.
But also there are like thresholds. You can have so many mutilations before your character just becomes unplayable. Mm-hmm. And also some mutilations reduce ability traits. So like you have an ability trait called survival. And if some mutilations reduce your survival to 0, your character just dies.
Okay.
And then you have the mutations. Like from time to time, you roll a random mutation. Your character mutates over time. And if you roll a mutation which corresponds with the mutilation you have, the mutation becomes much more powerful. So playing a terribly mutilated character is more difficult, but it also sort of grants you potential advantage in your character advancement.
And what's the basic premise of the game? Is it what's the basic premise of the game?
The basic premise of the game is that one day rats remember that they're sentient, they can read, write, talk, and they have a prophet called EE. And the prophet convinces them that they were created in the image of God, they created civilizations, they wrote all the books, they wrote the Bible, they created all the art, and humans just stole the civilization, erased all their history, and like humans basically stole the universe from the rat. Mm-hmm. And God is a rat, rats are created in his image, and like every time someone says that humans were created in the image of God, he is blaspheming. And this prophet goes about the world, he creates all sorts of different rat cultures. And each rat culture is like a very vicious parody of some human culture. And these cultures are like very belligerent also against one another. And then the prophet departs and the rats declare sort of a holy war against humanity. But they're mostly busy backstabbing one another, stealing from one another, blaming each other for not actually advancing in the war, and generally being nasty. And the thing about the game is that characters, as they advance, they become very strange, almost unrecognizable. As rat can get all sorts of weird mutations, can go to the dream world. It's a very insane game. Like again, I spoke about the mechanics, but from the fluff standpoint, one of the things that characterizes the game is hypocrisy. Like in this game, you have to be a hypocrite. It's a very big part of the game. Like,
you have to be a hypocrite.
Yes, all the cultures depend on colossal hypocrisy, and it's actually built into the game. Like every culture is utterly different in the way it shows itself to the world and the way it actually is. Like they're like these corporate rats, which are corporate rats. Mm-hmm. Oh, the game is full of bad puns, so I apologize in advance to people who don't like bad puns. So they're like the corporates, and they're like, we must destroy the human world financially, we must infiltrate into their banking system, we must destroy their currency. And in practice, what they're doing is actually they're doing business with humans and are making a lot of money.
Okay. And
there are the the rats. They're like sort of like Vikings. They have to go on raids and they have to kill humans and save the environment because humans they're like environmentalist rats. And in practice, what they do is just they steal alcohol because they like to get drunk.
Okay.
So in the game, if you actually want to do what you're supposed to do, your main opponent will be just the insane hypocrisy of all the rat cultures you have to deal with.
And you said this is going to be available next month for the backers, and then presumably available for other people after that?
I really hope so, yes. As I said, I actually got the final file today. I'm going to go over it, and if it's fine, and there should be no problem.
And that's all. Publishing is always a very slow process.
Agonizingly slow.
Yeah. Well, you have by the time it comes out, it's something that you like have been, you were enthusiastic about 2 years ago. Sometimes, it's one of those sort of things.
Oh, I'm still very enthusiastic about this game. I think like it's been great fun writing it, and I think it will be a fun game.
Did you have? I know when you first started it, you were posting a lot of pictures of actual rats. Did you have a lot of pet rats at the time that you were writing this, or was that just something that you had rats on hand for the pictures?
Actually, these rats belong to one of my employees. She at the time she had 4 rats, who sadly passed away since then. But every time I come to visit her, the rats would like instantly run and climb on me.
Okay.
They were like they were like small dogs. Basically, they behave like dogs. Like you could throw stuff and they run and fetch it. They were very friendly. They like to be pet. So she just took a few photos of me covered in her rats. I love rats, but I don't have any rats of my own.
Okay. Yeah, that's. I mean, I wasn't sure if they were pets or not when I saw the pictures, but
yeah, they're pets. They're fancy rats. They're not feral rats.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I've had you here for like an hour. So is there anything else that I haven't brought up that you want to talk about, or any of your books that you'd like to draw attention to?
Well, as I said, Noblesse Oblige is my latest novel. I'm very excited about it. It's my first novel. I've been writing for years, but it's the first time I actually completed a novel. And the thing about this book is, while working on it, I was surprised myself with how the story turned out each time. Because basically my approach was I'm a GM, it's campaign, but it's got only NPCs. I was basically running a game with only NPCs in it. And there were like one time when the protagonist was in a bind, and I said, okay, so like I right now I'm looking at the player, and I have absolutely no idea what I should do. Like I have invented a challenge that I don't know how to solve it. I have no idea how to approach it. And actually started asking my friends, like, what would you do in this situation? They're like, you're writing the book, you can do whatever you want. No, but I don't want to cheat. Like I invented this problem and I want to solve it or not. Maybe the protagonist will lose. I don't know. Like a book doesn't have a happy ending. Like some books have a bad ending. Just tell me what would you have done. And like the final encounter is actually something that is inspired by like telling someone, okay, so that's so difficult. I have no idea what to do with it. Like I have driven myself into a bind, and I think like the final result turned out pretty nice because like I was surprised myself to avoid stereotypes and actually like run a game with myself. So, and I repeated like several times now, but that's like for me the most unique and enjoyable part of working on this book.
Okay,
but
no,
I would of course love to hear the opinions of other people.
And I mean, and it sounds like it started. I mean, I saw a couple of reviews on Amazon, and I mean, like I said, it came out with the 28th. So
yeah,
hopefully we'll start getting some feedback there. I was able to read the first chapter before this interview, and I'm going to actually order a hard copy of the book because I like to read things in print when I sit down to read them. But I think. It sounds like you have the thing that you're saying that's intriguing me is that it sounds like you were willing to surprise yourself as the writer, and so
yes.
I'm not necessarily going to know as a reader, okay, this person's going to survive because they're the main character, or they're going to get what they want because that's how it's supposed to play out, which I think makes for a more engaging and interesting story. How long did it take you to write it?
A lot because I was working pretty slow. Like there was no deadline. I was just working at my own leisure. And in the meantime, I had my day job. I had several writing projects. Actually, there was a hire to work on, so they had high priority. I would say around 2 years.
Okay. That's not too long, really. Was it 260 pages or something?
Yes.
So I mean, that's not too long for that amount of time, I think, or for that many pages.
I think a professional writer will probably do it much faster. But I was in no hurry, and also, as I said, there was like one part I got completely stuck. I had absolutely no idea what reasonable thing the character can do at this point. So that was like a pretty long break when I actually started badgering people. Okay, what would you do that in situation? Nah, that wouldn't solve it. What would you do? No, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. The villain is way too smart for that.
And how would you say, like, what? I mean, I know you said you wrote it kind of in the style of a GM, but I mean, obviously it's still a different medium. So was there?
Yes, of course.
Was there a difference in the process? Was there, was there anything you had to, any other skill sets that you have to draw on when you're writing a book versus writing
yes,
a
absolutely.
game material?
When you're writing a role-playing supplement, you want to be as clear as possible. Like language is the vehicle you use to transfer the idea in the clearest, simplest form to the reader. When you're writing a book, you want language itself to be interesting. You want to, like, the language is one of the tools you use to convey mood, to convey tone, to control the pace. So like the way I see it, campaign setting is basically 100,000 words of exposition. Mm-hmm. And the players are those creating the story. It's completely static. Like
so
you describe.
Oh, go ahead.
You describe a certain setting. You describe all the problems, and that's that. And the story moves through time. So first of all, like the language you choose is very important. You control the pace. You control the mood through the use of language, which becomes much more important. And also, I often had to resist giving too much detail, because there's no such thing as too much detail in a campaign setting. Like the more detailed the campaign is, the better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because like if you describe a small village, maybe the GM will use it someday. I don't know. Who knows? like you had the Ravenloft core setting, and then you had all the gazetteers.
Yeah.
And I actually used a lot of data from the gazetteers. Like there's like this small tavern on the edge of a small village, on the edge of a forest somewhere, and at some point the players actually reach the spot. And I don't have to invent it. I actually have a gazetteer for that. And in a novel, you have to say, okay, stop. You will never use that information. No one cares about it. It doesn't matter what happens like on the other end of the universe. Just let it be.
Okay, that makes total sense. The I like the distinction you made between exposition, sort of like a role playing game is kind of like a setting is it's kind of all exposition, and
yes,
in a novel that's you're trying to hide the exposition, I guess, is maybe a way to put it. Like it seems like as a reader, when I'm reading a novel, especially now, the exposition is something that generally is avoided or concealed in.
Heinlein was genius in that regard. Like he would get you into his world without explaining much. He would just understand the setting from the action, and that's what I try to do. Okay. I mean, Heinlein is a genius. Yes, I don't presume to be anywhere near his level, but that's the direction that I wanted to go in.
Okay.
Like for the readers to understand the thing based on the action, based on the characters, without actually explaining anything.
No, and I Starship Troopers is still one of my favorite stories of all time.
It's a masterpiece.
Yeah, it's one of the it's kind of it's one of the cool things about it is you sort of it can be really difficult, I think, to keep a reader's interest through the kinds of things that he's having you tour, like just like he literally puts you in a classroom. Do you know what I mean? And like you're to make that interesting is not easy. But I think it's through the techniques that you're talking about there. So would you say that
his ideas are so bold, so provocative, like he's so challenging? Like I wrote most of his works in high school, and I think my political consciousness was mostly like fashioned by Heinlein. And the interesting is some of his books actually contradict one another. Like the political philosophy of Starship Troopers is very different from the political philosophy of The Moon's Harsh Mistress. Well, but both of these books, they really make you think.
Yeah, no, well, that's the good thing about him. You don't even necessarily have to agree with him. Like, if it's just the fact that he presents a very compelling case for what he's trying to say, and so you're forced to engage the discussion. I like Starship Troopers was kind of outside of my like where I might be politically, but I found it fascinating, and I found his political arguments fascinating.
I think it's outside like almost everyone politically is because it's in other ways it presents rather totalitarian universe, but it makes like if you have a liberal outlook, it makes you like think about it more. Like, okay, I'm liberal. Why am I liberal?
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
And if you have to defend your position, it also affects it. So
yeah,
that's a wonderful thing.
And I remember him making pretty solid historical arguments in that book, when he's trying to explain and justify the society he's talking about, and so you have to actually think about the history that he's thinking about, and so I don't know, I just found it compelling for that reason. But so would you say he was a big influence on you as a writer, obviously?
Less like in his actual stories, but more like in the way that he's so discreetly immerse you into his setting.
And were there, and obviously Dune is another, were there any other writers that were influential?
Well, Roald Dahl, Charlie Chocolate Factory. Like, I'm not saying as a joke, it actually affected the way my story is constructed. There's like this location, it's a fairly small location, but it's full of stuff, very cool stuff. And they're like these very different people with very clear characters. They're almost stereotypes. And they have the different objectives. Well, in Charlie Chocolate Factory, they have the same objective, but in my book, they have different objectives. And as the story progresses, all sorts of stuff happen to those people.
Okay.
And like in my book, it's different because most of the stuff, they actually things they do to one another, not just the environment. Mm-hmm. But I actually really like that structure, and I'm surprised that there aren't more books that use this kind of meta structure. I think it's a terrific book. It obviously it's for children, but it's a very nice book.
I mean, it's obviously, I mean, it's resonated with a lot of people, and I mean, so much. I mean, there's a role playing adventure based on it, even, right? So now, yeah.
Actually, when I read the book, I was thinking, okay, that's a dungeon crawl. I'm reading a dungeon crawl right now.
That's it. Yeah, no, I can totally see it. Like when that adventure came out, I instantly made the connection. When I was reading it, it totally went over my head. But a lot of that's often the case. Like a lot of this is very much outside of that area. But I've been reading a lot of old sort of Chinese legends in this book called Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio, and it's just little tiny, like some guy went to the market and he had a weird encounter with a guy who was half goat or something, just like little really condensed stories, or occasionally the stories will be like maybe 20 pages or more, but they're usually pretty short and to the point. And I found that they were really great source material for adventures. You could just randomly flip to a story, and it was like a ready-made adventure concept that you could just if you didn't have an idea that day for your game, just randomly pick out a story in the book. And
I felt the same way about the Arabian Nights, like the 1001 Nights. Almost every story is a person gets in trouble, then they have to get out of this trouble. That's basically an adventure hook.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. That's a really good example. I think that kind of structure works really well for gaming inspiration, and for just getting I don't know, ideas that are like, they're really accessible if you're a gamer. They're really accessible, I think, if you were like a movie director or needed a cool concept for your movie. They just kind of I don't know. The older I get, the more I go to stuff material like that for inspiration. But yeah. So again, Noblesse Oblige, and it's available on Amazon and in bookstores, and I'll post a link in the description below. And yeah. So any closing remarks before we head out?
Closing remarks. Game, like, make sure other people game, make sure everyone games, everyone should game. Game is cool.
All right,
go to the Amazons, find some tribe that has never heard of Europeans, teach them to game. Like, everyone should be gaming.
And I think I can stand by that. So we'll end there. And again, it was great. It was great having you on. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think that there was we covered a lot of ground.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so we will be back on I think I have an I, Claudius discussion coming up on Sunday, and next week we're going to get back into our Wusha weekend. And so until then, I will talk to everyone later.